Well, the Gog and Magog alliance has officially become a reality. On Wednesday, Turkey, Russia, and Iran met at a summit meeting, and on Wednesday they pledged their support to accelerate efforts to bring stability to Syria. And that coming on the heels of what Donald Trump has said that he will leave Syria. And in speaking to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump relayed to him that he would be leaving the region sooner than later. In fact, here's a headline coming out of the Times of Israel. It says, White House, U.S. military mission in Syria coming to a rapid end. And the subheading of the article is that without giving timeline for withdrawal, Press Secretary says U.S. and allies committed to eliminating the small ISIS presence not yet defeated. And reading a little bit from the article, says a day after President Trump said he wanted to get out of Syria, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the Islamic State group had been almost completely destroyed in the war-torn nation. Trump's national security team has warned of the risk of the militants' re-emergence and has urged the president against a hasty withdrawal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in a phone call on Wednesday, he talked to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and apparently the phone call turned very tense. And according to this article, it says that Trump wants to pull out all troops, including allies, within 6 months. Now, certainly not everybody's happy about the move, even including some of the allies. But I don't think anybody's staying in Syria unless the U.S. does. Now, the article goes on and says it said that President Trump reiterated the commitment of the United States to Israel's security. It added that the two leaders agreed to continue their close coordination on countering Iran's malign influence and destabilizing activities. Netanyahu later tweeted that he thanked President Trump for his commitment to Israel's security and America's support for Israel at the United Nations. Now, certainly I don't believe that the United States is abandoning Israel. I think that there will be this alliance that will form, and I think that's where the president's commitment will lie. So in the coming weeks, that's exactly what I expect to see, more talk and more action that will lead to the creation of this alliance. But at the same time, I'm also seeing another alliance form officially, and that being Russia, Iran, and Turkey. You know, if you'd have told me 2 years ago, I believe it's been 2 years, that Russia and Turkey would be on the same side, especially after they downed one of Russia's jets, I probably would have said you're crazy. But I knew in the back of my mind at some point in time that they would become partners in Syria and would ultimately camp out on Israel's northern border in the process of an attack. But I didn't think it would come this soon. Now, certainly these three nations indicate that they are there to maintain stability and the ceasefire in Syria, but we know that the Bible says that these three nations will ultimately come down and attack Israel, or at least set up to present an attack. I mean, if you look at Ezekiel 38, it never really says that they get to the point to where they attack. Pretty much all of the latter part of Ezekiel 38 describes the horror that will come upon this great army, and that it will destroy them. And in the early parts of chapter 39, it says that 5/6 of, or 83% of this army will be destroyed. It won't be a total destruction, but they certainly will not be coming back anytime soon. You know, when Israel was in war with the Islamic world in 1948, in 67, and also in 72, to the world, it looked like Israel was defeating these great armies using their military might. But there have been great stories indicating that the hand of God was mightily upon the children of Israel to defeat this nation, and also supernatural events were said to have had happened. And certainly that may very well be the same way that this Gog and Magog war will take place. But you know what? The only difference is the Bible specifically goes out of its way in verse 23 of Ezekiel 38 to say, "Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord." You know, it gives the indication that the world will actually look upon this war and glorify God. and they will see this defeat as a supernatural defeat. So now I want to switch back and read a little bit from this article from the Daily Mail. Here's the title of it. It says, Putin cements powerful new alliance with Iran and Turkey in challenge to Trump and the West as the three leaders vow to bring a lasting ceasefire to Syria at summit in Ankara. You know, it's getting pretty scary when the world highlights exactly what the Bible says. You know, this title says, Putin cements powerful new alliance with Iran and Turkey to challenge the Trump administration and the West. You know, that's exactly what I see and how I see this alliance coming down. And I've said this for months, and maybe even for years, that at some point in time I believe that the Putin administration would create this alliance, set up shop in Syria, and on the other side, Mr. Trump would set up his alliance with the modern Arab world and Israel. Now, whether or not the Palestinians will get on board, it really makes no difference. They're not a nation, nor are they militarized. So simply put, they can be nothing more than an obstacle in the way anyway. And one of the highlights of this article, it says that the partnership is increasingly diminishing Western influence in the region as Trump mulls pulling out. And as I've said, I think when push comes to shove, I do believe the Trump administration will probably leave the region. Of course, they're not going to completely leave the region, but they're certainly not going to leave enough behind to fight a meaningful war with Russia, Iran, and Turkey if, in fact, it does blow up in that direction, which we know it will. And, you know, here's a map of where things actually stand in Syria. And you can see that the Russian allies basically control the whole of Syria, with the U.S. and allied presence mainly in the northern portion of Syria. And you can see in the gray areas that there are still a few sizable spots where the ISIS fighters are still located, and I'm not sure how many ISIS fighters are estimated to still be around. I think it's in the tens of thousands, but certainly I could be wrong on that figure. It could be down into the thousands. But the Trump administration has declared that they will continue to fight until ISIS is eliminated. But in translation, I think that probably means that until ISIS is scattered and sent back to their nations, and Syria is pretty much freed of a major ISIS presence. So what should we be looking for in the coming weeks and months ahead? Well, you're probably looking at a diminishing role of the U.S. and allies in Syria. And at the same time, you should see Russia, Iran, and Turkey carving out a greater foothold on Syria, bringing in heavy artillery, ships, and aircraft in the name of keeping Syria under control and the ceasefire intact. But as we know, the Bible says that at some point in time, and I'm not saying that that is their underlying mission right now for being in Syria, but the Bible is clear that at some point in time, that God will place a hook in the leader of the Gog and Magog war, and the hook will be so powerful that he will be unable to walk away from this war. And the Bible says there will be some type of spoil that he'll come for. And I'll leave that up to you to decide what you think that spoil may be, but the Bible says that they're coming. And you know, if I were you and I didn't know the Lord, I'd certainly get saved just based upon the fact that the chances that Israel would become a nation again after 2,000 years in exile was a mere impossibility. The fact that the Bible has predicted that these three nations, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, would come together in these last days when Israel is a nation again, would form an alliance and would be on the border of Israel, all in the time in which Israel is in the middle of a peace process, which the Bible says will one day last for 7 years, and during a time in which Jerusalem is a hotbed of international proportions. And you know, before this is all said and done, we may actually see the temple being rebuilt before the rapture takes place. Who knows? It may happen. But all these things culminating at the same time, converging, tells me, common sense, I need to be saved. That the last days are actually here. The tribulation period is about to happen. The rapture is about to happen. So I would certainly encourage you to come to the Lord today. And certainly, if you are a Christian, I would very much also encourage you to get a copy of my Tribulation Period Survival Guide. I would ask you to put that in the hands of every lost friend and loved one that you know they're not saved. And certainly if they read this book, they'll understand and learn that the first thing they need to do is come to the Lord. So if you give them this book or download it for them or whatever the case, they may come to know the Lord before the rapture takes place or before they die. But the only way you can do that is to go down to the description section in this video. Click on the link and it'll take you to either of the versions. Well, I hope you'll do that today. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.